Hello, everybody. Welcome to our reading of the Screwtape Letters following, or I guess this is going to be on All Saints Day. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys had a nice, fun time. Yeah, we're just going to go ahead and jump right on back into these. If you have not been with me before, pretty simple what we do here. We are going to go ahead and take a look at C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. Keep in mind, these are all written from the point of view of a demon to his nephew. So everything that does come out of these, all the terminology and points of view and things like that are from that perspective. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through these. At any point you have thoughts, comments, go ahead and leave them and let me know. I'd love to have a bit of discussion, hopefully go just beyond the surface reading here. So, but yeah, without any further ado, we will go ahead and jump on into this. My dear Wormwood, I have been in correspondence with Slumtrimpant. I love Lewis's names for demons that he comes up with. He comes up with just really wacky ones. So this is just another demon he's introducing here under this name, who is in charge of your patient's young woman. This being the young woman that the patient is fallen in love with, and begun to see the chink in her armor. It is an unobtrusive little vice, which she shares with nearly all women who have grown up in an intelligent circle, united by a clearly defined belief. And it consists in quite an untroubled assumption that the outsiders, who do not share this belief, are really too stupid and ridiculous. And yeah, that's something that actually that there can be, if you're not careful, especially on a subconscious level, you can develop a contempt for outsiders who refuse your beliefs. Not necessarily people that are ignorant, but people that are purposely dismissive. Especially, it can be easy to become dismissive of them in turn, which is a form of sin, really. The males who habitually meet these outsiders do not feel that way. Their confidence, if they are confident, is of a different kind. Hers, which she supposes to be due to faith, is in reality largely due to the mere color she has taken from her surroundings. It is not, in fact, very different from the conviction she would have felt at the age of 10 that kind of fish knives used in her father's house were the proper or normal or real kind, while those of the neighboring families were not real fish knives at all. Basically tackling the idea that what you grew up with, what you're exposed to, what you know is the correct version, anything else is wrong merely by, the virtue of that being what you grew up with, what you knew. And that's something that's actually very easy to fall into without even giving it really a second thought. It's so easy to just fall into that attitude of this is what I know to be correct, so I don't have to question it, I don't have to think about it, I don't have to ever try to evolve or pursue the idea of anything new, I don't ever have to grow, ultimately. And unfortunately, it's something that a lot of churches will even fall into. They'll fall into this trap of just saying, what the pastor says is true without ever asking you to do your own research and kind of dig up and oftentimes verify, but even question what has been brought up. There's value in that so long as you have at least a basic knowledge in what you're trying to tackle. Even if you're prepared to be totally wrong, which I think you should be anytime you're questioning things, but the questioning of if what you think you know to be true, that's a vital part, I would argue, of any true walk. And it's something that should kind of be put forth. It's something that should be questioned. That's the whole basis behind deeper studies. Now, the element of ignorance and naivete in all this is so large, the element of spiritual pride so small, that it gives us little hope of the girl herself. But have you thought of how it may be made to influence your own patients? It is always the novice who exaggerates. The man who has risen in society is over-refined, and the young scholar is pedantic. In this new circle, your patient is a novice. He is there daily, meeting Christian life of a quality he has never before imagined, and seeing it all through an enchanted glass because he is so in love. He is anxious. Indeed, the enemy, in this case meaning God because it's written by demons, commands him to imitate this quality. Can you get him to imitate this defect in his mistress and to exaggerate it? until what was Vanille in her becomes in him the strongest and most beautiful type of vices, spiritual pride. And yeah, that's something where basically what Lewis is saying here is that whenever you're new to something, whenever you are kind of a beginning convert, if we'll call it that, there's a risk of becoming so overly pleased and happy with everything around you that you kind of become arrogant, especially if you're not careful in the way you present it to others, because it's something that you have found this overwhelming freedom and release in. The assumption is naturally everyone else has as well, and if that's something that they're not taking as read, you're not prepared to actually argue your stance, and then you become dismissive of the people who are perhaps not convinced or else might be dismissive of you. That does, of course, happen, but that will well up and create this spiritual pride in you, which is of course, a grievous sin because that pulls you directly away from God because you're then assuming that you have this spiritual growth by your own standard or your own virtue, which is, of course, completely wrong. The conditions seem ideally favorable. The new circle in which he finds himself is one of which he is tempted to be proud for many reasons other than its Christianity. It is a better educated, more intelligent, and more agreeable society than any he has yet encountered. He is also under some sort of illusion as to his place in it. Under the influence of love, he may still think himself unworthy of the girl, but he is rapidly ceasing to think himself unworthy of the others. He has no notion how much in him is forgiven because they are charitable, and made the best of because he is now one of the family. He does not dream how much of his conversation, how many of his opinions are recognized by them as mere echoes of their own. Still less does he suspect how much of the delight he takes in these people is due to the erotic enchantment with the girl. For him, spreads over all her surroundings. And that's also something that's true. Like, whenever, especially through romance, is one of the biggest ways, but whenever you're brought into a group of people who are loving, who are understanding, who do have that higher sense of care or intelligence or refinement or whatever you want to call it, whatever that may be, that is something that is seen as societally advantageous. Um, you can find yourself with a sense of belonging very quickly. And in one hand, that's a great thing because it means that you're not feeling like an outsider, you're not feeling like an outcast. But on the other hand, if you're not careful, that can quickly lead into an arrogance of belonging, which is not necessarily something you want to carry around. Arrogance of any kind is always a danger, but especially of belonging to a group that you've only just started to step into is dangerous because if you then present yourself as an expert, you're looking to be corrected very swiftly, and usually very unpleasantly. He thinks he likes their talk and way of life because of some congruity between their spiritual state and his, when in fact they are so far beyond him that if he were not in love, he would merely be puzzled and repelled by much which he now accepts. He is like a dog, which should imagine it understood the firearms, because its hunting instinct and love for its master enable it to enjoy a day's shooting. And there's also an aspect of that. Sorry, getting dry mouth. There's an aspect, and this is something that kind of goes to people who are farther along in their walk as well. It's an aspect for them to make sure they're bringing forth in an environment with newer believers. Acceptance and patience breed a willingness to understand and learn, and an acceptance where they don't understand, that they have yet to learn the fundamental aspects of that. Um, there are multiple studies that I've done or am a part of where if we have somebody in that's newer, we don't discourage them. We try to make sure we catch them up in the basics. Hey, try to explain this is what's going on at this point in time in the Bible, or this is why this is relevant, or this is what we're discussing, this is what this is. And by doing that, they are not exercised or left out. And that's something that's very important to make sure is present. Now, there's also an aspect of kind of what level you're going to be talking on and who all you have as a part of that. That's kind of a different discussion too. I wouldn't bring somebody that's just heard of Christ to a discussion of people that are trying to break down, uh, say the book of Ecclesiastes into its every single part, because that might be a little bit beyond where they're at. But regardless, the idea of not being exclusionary is kind of what we're tackling here. It's this whole idea of not being exclusionary to outsiders, being understanding with people at whatever level they're at. And understanding is really a form of love, and acceptance is a form of unconditional love, which is one of the greatest callings we are put forth to. It goes into empathy, and it goes into patience, and it goes into really all um, the fruits of the spirit, really. Here is your chance. While the enemy, God, by means of sexual love and some very agreeable people, far advanced in his service, is drawing the young barbarian up, or sorry, up to levels he could never otherwise have reached, you must make him feel that he is finding his own level, that these people are his sort, and that coming among them, he has come home. When he turns from them to other society, he will find it dull, partly because almost any society within his reach is, in fact, much less entertaining, but still more because he will miss the enchantment of the young woman. You must teach him to mistake this contrast between the circle that delights and the circle that bores for the contrast between Christians and unbelievers. He must be made to feel, he'd better not put it into words, how different we Christians are. And by we Christians, he must really, but unknowingly, mean my set. And by my set, he must not mean the people who, in their charity and humility, have accepted me, but the people with whom I am associate by right. And that kind of goes into really an exaggerated form of what we were talking about a couple letters ago. Um, the idea of claiming something by right as opposed to being accepted. Acceptance is a wonderful and loving thing. Claiming something is a form of selfishness. It is a form of uh, the idea of being owed something. It goes into entitlement. Success here depends on confusing him. If you try to make him explicitly, professly proud of being a Christian, you will probably fail. The enemy's warnings are too well known. If, on the other hand, you let the idea of we Christians drop out altogether and merely make him complacent about his set, you will produce not true spiritual pride, but mere social vanity, which by comparison is a trumpy, puny little sin. What you want to keep, or sorry, what you want is to keep a sly self congratulations mixing with all his thoughts, and never allow him to raise the question of what precisely am I congratulating myself about? The idea of belonging to an inner ring, of being in a secret, is very sweet to him. Play that nerve. Teach him, using the influence of this girl when she is silliest, to adopt an air of amusement at the things the unbelievers say. And I guess we'll pause right there real quick. There's a difference between being amused at things people say and being arrogant about them as a people. And I guess it's a thin line, but it's one I think is important, and I kind of will draw a distinction there. Because there is an amusement that comes with people that will kind of tout tired debate points without ever actually having formed an understanding or opinion or even a basic knowledge of what they're talking about. And I would classify this as slightly laughable in a way. Not necessarily that it's, oh, look at these foolish little people, but more on the idea of, okay, look at the tired talking point that so many people try to use. Because I think there is a comedy in that. Now, that's not the same thing as mocking somebody. That's not the same thing as belittling them and thinking, oh, these foolish morons. That's not what I'm talking about. That's completely in a form of dismissiveness and arrogance. Um, it's kind of the same, it goes similarly, really, to hating the sin and loving the sinner. I can love the person who touts those ideals while thinking the ideals themselves are kind of hilarious. So I guess I would just draw that distinction between those two personally. Some theories, which he may meet in modern Christian circles, may here prove helpful. Theories I mean, that place of hope of society in some inner rings of clerks, some trained minority of theocrats. It is no affair of yours whether those theories are true or false. The great thing is to make Christianity a mystery religion, in which he feels himself one of the initiates. Pray do not fill your letters with rubbish about this European war. Its final issue is no doubt important, but that is a matter for the High Command. I am not in the least interested in knowing how many people in England have been killed by bombs, in what state of mind they died. I can learn from the office at this end that they were going to die sometime. I knew already. Please keep your mind on your work. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. That's something, yeah, that I would say Lewis has pretty bang on the money. There is a vast difference between trying to gain a higher understanding and letting Christianity be this vague mystery religion. That's how you kind of get into the New Agey sort of thing. If you go too far down that road, and so much of this does have to do with a personal spiritual connection to God. Until you gain that, there is an aspect of study, there is an aspect of following the tradition and being, for lack of a better word, really religious. But the goal in that religious following, the goal in that pattern is to gain a personal spiritual walk with God, because that's what's going to give you faith, that's what's going to give you discernment, that's what's going to give you understanding. That's the purpose of the Bible and for all its teachings and for everything that we do whenever we go to church and we study and we try to gain all this. It's all for the purpose of helping you build a personal relationship with God and understanding him better. That's essential if you're going to have a walk. You can't just do it purely through tradition. That's kind of the trip that the Jews, or the trap that the Jews fell into around the coming of Christ. They were so steeped in their tradition that whenever the God, did anything that was outside of that tradition, they couldn't accept it. And when I say they, I probably predominantly mean the Pharisees. Many of the villagers, I'm sure, were that way too, but predominantly the Pharisees, who were supposed to be the religious experts, couldn't handle the spirituality in front of them because they were so steeped in the tradition that they actually didn't know God. And that's what I mean. It's all important, but it's important for the purpose of knowing God, not for its own sake. The Bible even talks about how ultimately the religion that God accepts is to take care of orphans and widows. If religion then were all that were required, that's all we would be doing. But the point that we have all these sermons and worship and all this kind of stuff, it's all for the purpose of drawing closer to God and helping you know who God is. And hopefully it's something that can stir a personal desire to know him beyond just a Sunday service. If Sunday service is all you have of God, he's not really a part of your life. Letter 25. My dear Wormwood, the real trouble about the set your patient is living in is that it is merely Christian. They all have individual interests, of course, but by the bonds of mere Christianity. If we want, what we want, if men become Christians at all, is to keep them in the state of mind I call Christianity and. Christianity and the crisis, Christianity and new psychology, Christianity and the new order, Christianity and faith healing, Christianity and psychological research, Christianity and vegetarianism, Christianity and spelling reform. If they must be Christians, let them at least be Christians with a difference. Substitute for the faith itself some fashion with a Christian coloring. Work on their horror of the same old thing. And that's an excellent point, really. It's a mistake to consider yourself anything with Christianity. I guess that's the difference I would put. Johnny Cash has an old way I like putting kind of a spin on it. He was quoted as saying, "I am not a what was it? I am not a Christian artist. I am an artist who is a Christian." I would just alter that slightly to say, "I am not a Christian artist. I am a Christian who is an artist." The Christianity has to be the focal point of that. That's the central aspect of it. Everything else goes around that. I am a Christian who's also a dungeon master. I'm a Christian who's also a streamer. I'm a Christian who's also a gamer. Those things all are part of it, but they all serve under Christianity. That comes first and foremost. It has to be the number one part of your life. If you insist on tacking something else onto that Christianity in the way that you're going to define it, then you're not defining yourself by your Christianity. You're defining it by this sect of whatever group B may be. If you're defining yourself as, you know, let's take one of Lewis's example here, Christianity and the New Order, then what you're really doing is you're not defining yourself by the Christianity at all. Rather, within the New Order, you're defining yourself by this Christian sect at the most. I mean, faith healing is one where people would argue there's very little difference. And so my point there is, if you want to focus on any one of those things, make sure that it's the Christian first, not Christianity attached to this other thing, because then the other thing becomes the value. And he also drives home this idea of horror of the same old thing. And I wouldn't say it's something that's so much a horror nowadays, but it is something that very much comes with a form of dismissal and mocking of, oh, you believe in that old dead religion. And again, I just talked at length about how religion in and of itself is not a grand thing, but um, that there is this fear that can be attached to just serving God in the traditional sense. Sorry, excuse me. Whew. Forgot to breathe there. But there is something that can so easily become attached to the idea of serving God in the same old way that can become something we don't want to be criticized for, which is kind of ludicrous. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the idea of critiques and ideas of Christianity that can be hilarious in their own right. I would count that among them. The idea that, oh, well, you don't want to just be serving God in the same old way. Well, why don't I want to serve God in the way that the apostles did and then the way that all the old, saints did? They had their stuff right. The horror of the same old thing is one of the most valuable passions we have produced in the human heart. An endless source of heresies in religion, folly in counsel, infidelity in marriage, and inconsistency in friendship. The humans live in time and experience relatively successfully. Or sorry, reality successfully. To experience much of it, therefore, they must experience many different things. In other words, they must experience change. And since they need change, the enemy, being a hedonist at heart, has made change pleasurable to them, just as he has made eating pleasurable. But since he does not wish them to make change any more than eating an end in and of itself, he has balanced the love of change in them by a love of permanence. He has contrived to gratify both tastes together in the very world he has made. By that union of change and permanence, which we call rhythm, he gives them the seasons. Yet each season is different, yet every year the same. So that spring is always felt as a novelty, yet always as the recurrence of a memorial theme. He gives them in his church every year, or a spiritual year, which they change from a fast to a feast, but it is not the same feast as before. Now, just as we pick out and exaggerate the pleasure of being able to eat to produce gluttony, so we pick out this natural pleasantness of change and twist it to demand a absolute novelty. This demand is entirely in our workmanship. If we neglect our duty, men will not only be content, but transported by the mixed novelty of familiarity of snowdrops this January, sunrise this morning, plum pudding this Christmas. So here Lewis is just hitting how the human heart can't have the same thing endlessly day after day, and that's why the world is in motion. It's why we live in time, because we have to experience change, but we don't want to just be seeking newness for the sake of newness itself. Doing that will so often breed you into the enemy's camp, because they love coming up with something that's allegedly new. So often it's really something old under a new name. But the idea of being part of the hip new thing, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to put that in, is something that is always it's like a lover that's just trying to tempt people to her door. It often has no substance. It often has no real value to it, but it's something that's brand new. And so, by virtue of it being brand new, it's seen as something that's radical and breaking the outdated traditions. And that idea is something that's always going to be tempting to people. And it's especially dangerous in religious circles because that's something that's always going to draw people who are frustrated with their religion in one reason or another into this new sect. It's one of the reasons why we have 9,000 different denominations of Christianity, which I think is a vast mistake, even if I disagree with some of the other denominations in the way that they approach things specifically. The end fact is that having denominations means they have a doctrine that they're following, and their doctrine is actually replacing God. But because it's a new thing, people feel that it can get rid of their frustrations with the old. Children, until we have taught them better, will be perfectly happy with a seasonal round of games in which conkers succeed hopscotch. I don't know what conkers is, but as regularly as autumn follows summer. Only by our incessant efforts is the demand for infinite or unrhythmical change kept up. This demand is valuable in various ways. It is in the first place, it diminishes pleasure with an increasing desire. We've talked before about how pleasure is something that cannot return on itself. Pleasure is an ever diminishing thing, and so you need to up the radicalization of whatever is bringing the pleasure in order to get that same hit. The pleasure of novelty is by its very nature more subject than any other to the law of diminishing returns. I just said that. And by novelty costs money. So that the desire for it spells avarice. Well, we went through a whole letter without me having to look up a word, so we got farther than we normally do. Okay, so extreme greed. So continual novelty costs money, and by that the desire for it spells greed or unhappiness or both. And again, the more rapturous the desire, the sooner it must eat up all the innocent sources of pleasure and pass on to those the enemy forbids. Thus, by inflaming the horror of the same old thing, we have recently made the arts, for example, less dangerous to us than perhaps they have ever been. Lowbrow and highbrow artists alike are now drawn into the fresh and still fresh excesses of lavishness, unreason, cruelty, and pride. Finally, the desire for novelty is indispensable if we are to produce fashions or vogues. And that's something that's very true, is especially in art. It's something that's very, 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 um, I guess, intertwined to have the new take, a new thought, a new process. And in and of itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the love for that newness, that pursuit of the hot new thing, or the fleeing of the same old thing, you can get into the radical, and the radical can easily be very, very dangerous, especially once we start combining that with the matters of the heart, because the radical can quickly lead you into ultimately insane beliefs. And we see quite a lot of that today. There are truly, truly radical, things being brought forth that are seen as perfectly acceptable because of its pursuit of the new. The use of fashions in thought is to distract the attention of men from their real dangers. We direct the fashionable outcry of each generation against those vices of which it is the least in danger, and fix its approval on the virtue nearest to that vice which we are trying to make endemic. The game is to have them all running about with fire extinguishers whenever there is a flood, and all crowding to that side of the boat which is nearly gone well under. Thus we must make it fashionable to expose the dangers of enthusiasm at the very moment when they are all really becoming worldly and lukewarm. A century later, when we are all really making them barbaric and drunk with emotion, the fashionable outcry is directed against the dangers of a mere understanding. Cruel ages are put on their guard against sentimentality, fecklessness, and idle ones against respectability, lecherous ones against puritanism, and whenever all men are really hastening to be slaves or tyrants, we make liberalism the prime bogey. And that's true. There's always going to be a general flow to society, and then the new thing is going to come along and counter it. There really is nothing new under the sun in that regard. Um, it might get more extreme, but we're going to continue playing in the same circles that we always have. Whenever the idea of sorry, excuse me. Whew. Whenever the idea of uh pureness and church and community was placed super super highly in history, along came the whole idea of individualism and rejecting all that and moving into the carelessness and radical beliefs of the hot new attitude towards life, if you want to put it that way. And that will happen with any form of what is the general belief. We're seeing it ironically almost start to occur in the opposite sense here. Now, the radical and extreme individualism are almost breeding a desire for the typical. It's something that is starting to awaken a little bit. I don't know if it's going to come about in 5 years or 50 years, but it is starting to move that way. There are just a few people definitely making that outcry, and it's not coming from the older generation, from the newer one rather. But the great triumph is to elevate this horror of the same old thing into a philosophy so that nonsense in the intellect may reinforce corruption in the will. It is here that the general evolutionary or historical character of modern European thought, partly our work, comes in so useful. The enemy, God, loves platitudes. Of a proposed course of action, he wants men, as far as I can see, to ask very simple questions. Is it righteous? Is it prudent? Is it possible? Now, if we keep men asking, is it in accordance with the general movement of our time? Is it progressive or reactionary? Is this the way that history is going? Which I love that he includes that version, because how many times have we heard the phrase recently, on the right side of history? They will negate the relevant questions. And the questions they do ask are, of course, unanswerable, for they do not know the future, and what the future will be depends very largely on just those choices which they now invoke the future to help them make. As a result, while their minds are buzzing on this vacuum, we will have better chance to slip in and bend them to the action we have decided on. This is one of the reasons why the Bible focuses so much on not having people lost in the future or the past, because being lost on both of those means you do neglect the present, and the present is what ultimately shapes everything that's going to come. Um, it's very easy to get lost in the future, and I'm not saying that you should ignore it. That's not the same thing. But to focus on it at the extent of the or at the expense of the moment, rather, is very much something that the demons and the devils love. They want to play on that so very much. Sorry, my chair is not chairing anymore, but I'm getting a new one soon. All right. Lost my place there. As a result, while their minds are buzzing in this vacuum, we have the better chance to slip in and bend them to the course of action we have decided on. And great work has already been done. Once they knew that some changes were for the better, and others for the worse, and others again indifferent, we have largely removed that knowledge. For the descriptive adjective unchanged, we have substituted the emotional adjective stagnant. We have trained them to think of the future as a promised land where favored heroes attain, not as something which everyone reaches at approximately the rate of 60 minutes an hour. Whatever he does, whoever he is. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Lewis is again, he's just bang on the money. You can't focus on the future. You can't get caught up emotionally in the idea of the brand new thing. That's not to say you must always blindly follow what has been, but to chase something new for the sake of newness itself it's an extreme mistake. My dear Wormwood, yes, courtship is the time for sowing those seeds which will grow up 10 years later into domestic hatred. The enchantment of unsatisfied desire produces results which the humans can be made to mistake for the results of charity. Avail yourself of the ambiguity in the word love. Let them think they have solved, by love, problems that they have in fact only wavered or postponed under the influence of enchantment. While it lasts, you have your own chance to ferment the problems in secret and render them chronic. I kind of talked on this one of the previous letters, but this idea of in love being what makes a marriage. In love, infatuation fades in every relationship. Love is something that is far more conscious. It is a choice. I always joke, if you've never kind of wanted to slap somebody upside the head, you've never really loved them. You've only been in love. In love doesn't deal with problems. In love doesn't deal with the struggles in a relationship. In love doesn't deal with the problems of life. Love has to handle all those things. And love is what makes a marriage. Love is difficult. Love is challenging. Love is frustrating at times. It's also beautiful, wonderful, and amazing. But yeah, this idea of infatuation, if you're building a relationship purely off of infatuation, you can very, very, very easily be setting yourself up for problems. This is one of the reasons why I so strongly discourage sex in a relationship before marriage, because that can also cause to this blindness. The grand problem of that unselfishness. Note once again, the grand problem is that of unselfishness. Note once again the admirable work of our philological arm in substituting this negative unselfishness for the enemy's positive charity. Thanks to this, you can, from the very outset, teach a man to surrender benefits, not that others may be happy in having them, but that he may be unselfish in foregoing them. That is a great point gained. Another great help, where the parties concerned are male and female, is the divergence of view about unselfishness, which we have built up between the sexes. A woman means by unselfishness chiefly taking trouble for others. A man means not giving trouble to others. Wow, I can't imagine the stir this would cause in certain circles today. But that's actually very, very true. A woman means in unselfishness the desire to help others, to help take their cares. A man means to hold his cares. This is one of the reasons why men and women can have such trouble communicating, is because men don't want to push their cares on somebody, and then women get frustrated saying, why aren't you sharing with me? Why aren't you letting me help you? And it gets this attitude that ultimately is meant as a good thing, but whenever it's spurned, whenever we feel like it's spurned, even though it isn't, we get very angry, and it goes into that thing, and it's so easy to mistake a self-congratulatory unselfishness, instead of having a true form of unselfishness, that being charity. It's something that's a very easy trap to fall into. That's why humility is one of those things that's so important. As a result, a woman who is quite far gone in the enemy's service will make a nuisance of herself on a larger scale than any man, except those whom our Father has dominated completely. And conversely, a man will live long in the enemy's camp before he undertakes as much spontaneous work to please others as an ordinary woman may do every day. Thus, while the woman thinks of doing good offices, and the man of respecting other people's rights, each sex, without any obvious unreason, can and does regard the other as radically selfish. On top of these confusions, you can now introduce a few more. The erotic enchantment produces a mutual compliance in which each is really pleased to give in to the wishes of the other. They also know that the enemy demands of them a degree of charity which, if attained, would result in similar actions. You must make them establish as a law for their whole married life that degree of mutual self-sacrifice, which is at present sprouting naturally out of the enchantment, but which, when the enchantment dies away, they will not have charity enough to enable them to perform. They will not see the trap, since they are under the double blindness of mistaking sexual excitement for charity and thinking the excitement will last. I just spoke on that a little bit. Yeah, when relationships are new, whenever you're in that infatuation stage, all of it comes very, very easy. Now, I would put as a caveat on that there's a difference between that and just letting the romance die. You have to find a way to keep the romance alive, but it's never going to be the same as it is during those initial weeks when everything is brand new and exciting and you have all that infatuation and all those lovely hormones going. It can't be. That's ludicrous. This is one of the reasons why people of the current age have life basically happen and say, "Oh, well, I must have fallen out of love, therefore we must get divorced." Well, because they were hoping for an infatuation to last, which cannot last. When once a sort of official, legal, or nominal unselfishness has established as a rule for keeping of which their emotional resources have died away and their spiritual resources have not yet grown, the most delightful results follow. In discussing any joint action, it becomes obligatory that A should argue in favor of B's supposed wishes against his own, while B does the opposite. It is often impossible to find out either party's real wishes. With luck, they end up, or sorry, with luck, they end by doing something that neither wants, while each feeling a glowing self righteousness that harbors a secret claim to preferential treatment of the unselfishness shown and a secret grudge against the other for the ease which the sacrifice has been accepted. And this is something that's very easy to fall into, especially if you're a giving person. It's very easy to fall into the trap of, well, I'm doing this for them, when you may not even know what they want. Now, there is an act of knowing what your partner wants in certain regards, and then giving that to them. There's also the call to understand when your partner is doing that and appreciate them for it. But especially on something that hasn't been discussed, it gets so easy that you think you know this person so well that you know what they want. When in reality, both of you may be arguing for something that neither of you want, and both of you are like trying to be kind, but the reality is you're being really selfish in this form of unselfishness. Later on, you can venture on what may be called the gracious conflict illusion. This game is best played with more than two players, in a family with grown up children, for example. Something quite trivial, like having tea in the garden is proposed. One member makes it quite clear, though in not so many words, that he would rather not, but is of course prepared to do so out of unselfishness. The others instantly withdraw their proposal, obscenely out of their own unselfishness, but really because they don't want to be used as the sort of lay figure which the first speaker practices petty altruisms. But he's not going to be done out by his debauch of unselfishness either. He insists on doing what the others want. They insist on doing what he wants. Passions are roused. Soon someone is saying, "Very well, then I won't have any tea at all." And a real quarrel ensues with bitter resentment on both sides. You see how this is done. If each side had been frankly contending for its own real wish, they all would have kept within the bounds of reason and courtesy. But just because the contention is reversed and each side is fighting for the other side's battle, all the bitterness, which really flows from thwarted self-righteousness and obstinacy, and the acclimated grudges of the last 10 years is concealed from them by the nominal or official unselfishness of what they're doing, at least held or excused by it. Each side is indeed quite alive to the cheap quality of the adversary's unselfishness and the false position into which he is trying to force them. But each manages to feel blameless and ill used itself, with no more dishonesty than comes natural to a human. And this ultimately is one of those things that comes down to communication. And it's one of the reasons why, if you have a relationship or even a friendship where you are able to be open and honest with a person, you guys need to like broach that as fast as possible. This is a trap I've fallen into time and times myself by trying to be nice, by trying to be understanding. You can end up having a not discussion where you both are growing increasingly frustrated with the other. And then if at any point the other person gives in, you feel frustrated with them because they gave in and are now being selfish by taking what you've offered. When in reality, even if you have opposing desires, the the way of just staying true to what you actually desire and what you want, and how you guys could actually approach this, from a more mature and charitable standpoint. It might be that you don't agree, but that doesn't necessarily mean conflict. And that's something I think people fall into too easily, especially with people who've grown up around angry people who will love conflict. You fall into this trap of, oh, well, if we disagree, that means conflict, and I don't want conflict, so therefore I'll give in. There's a total difference between disagreeing and conflict. It's not at all the same thing, and hopefully, the person you're in a relationship or a friendship with is mature enough to say, hey, I disagree, I would rather do X. That you guys can agree on a conclusion without falling into this battle of unselfishness that can so easily arise. It's a very easy trap to fall into. It's one. I'm glad Lewis has actually called it out here because it is something that's so easy to fall into. A sensible human once said, "If people knew how much unselfishness occasions, it would not be so recommended from the pulpit." And again, she's the sort of woman who lives for others. You can always tell by others their haunted expression. Haunted expression. All this can be begun even in the period of courtship. A little real selfishness on your patient's part is often of less value in the long run for securing his soul than the first beginnings of that elaborate and self conscious unselfishness which may one day blossom into the sort of thing I have described. Some degree of mutual falseness, some surprise that the girl does not always notice just how unselfish she is being, can be smuggled in already. Cherish these things, and above all, do not let the young fools notice them. If they notice them, they will be on the road to discovering that love, I would say infatuation, is not enough. That charity is needed, and not yet achieved, and that no external law can supply in its place. I wish Slum Trimpet would do something about undermining the young woman's sense of the ridiculousness. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. And that is going to be a decent place for us to go ahead and end things for today. I hope you guys got something out of this. Hope you had a little bit of fun, even with my stumbling all over my words, because I do that, and Lewis writes in an ancient dialect. But, he brought up a lot of good stuff. He actually hit on a lot of really, really poignant points today, and I hope just kind of as you go about your day, reflect on them a little bit. Maybe write some stuff down, kind of think about it, and try to keep that in mind, because demons will love to use that all against you. But that will do it for this time, so I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.